Good evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to yet another edition of Truth to Power. My name is Faraz Patel. Today we are making history on the show. Now, of course, with the show being launched during the time of COVID, a lot of our interviews were done via the virtual sites, for example, like Skype or Zoom. But today, we're making history. Today, it's going to be different. We have our first in-studio guest, and it's someone who's no stranger to South African politics. He is a current member of parliament. He was the former Major General of the Transkei Defence Force, and he is the current leader of the UDM. It's none other than Mr. Bantu Holomisa. Mr. Holomisa, thank you so much for joining us on Truth to Power.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to a hit.
Yes, definitely. We definitely going to make it that way. No, it's an absolute pleasure having you, Mr. Holomisa. Mr. Holomisa, let's just talk about how have things changed during COVID, you know, in the political sphere. Of course, everything done virtually, but of course, the same principles still stick, and that is, of course, holding the politicians and our ministers to account.
Obviously, the COVID period has taught us the technology in a big way. We've never thought that 400 members of parliament could be active through virtual meetings, through Zoom or Skype. And I think Zoom and Skype have made a killing in the process in terms of revenue, of their revenue. I'm sure their shareholders are smiling to the bank. But at least they helped during the difficult period, and I sense that many companies will stick to that, and of course that would be a loss to the property investment. So, but yes, we managed, although it's not as robust as when we see ministers across the floor and engage them, but at least we managed to keep the ball rolling.
Well, of course, my interview with Mr. Holomisa is divided into two sections, a part one and a part two. So when we have a politician of his stature, we have to maximize a lot of the time and, of course, get so much political wisdom and knowledge from him. Mr. Holomisa, the Transkei Defence Force, of course, formed during the time of apartheid to take on the apartheid government. Talk to us about the role of the Transkei Defence Force and, of course, you as Bantu Holomisa entering into the political frame during that dark period in our history.
The Transkei Defence Force was established in 1975 with a view to be a defence force of the Republic of Transkei, which was awarded an independence by Pretoria in 1976. So the defence force itself was for a country then called Transkei.
Transkei, yes.
But as you are aware, we had to intervene during that period and remove the government of Matanzimas and Sikaus. And after that, in 1988, we intervened in 1987, December. Early 1988, the Transkei Military Council established ties with ANC in Lusaka and BAC in Tanzania. The rest is history, because since then, we have been working with the liberation movement up until 1994, when Transkei Defence Force, or Transkei government, or Transkei as a whole, was integrated into New South Africa. And our forces were integrated with the other forces, MK, ABLA, Bophuthatswana, and so on. So we are happy with the role which we played during that period, because the ANC liberation movements can never claim anywhere that they had a liberated zone during their struggle with the apartheid government. But I can say boastfully that Transkei was a semi-liberated zone, because we could manage to house both liberation movements in Transkei without any hassles.
And that was going to be my next question, you know, just how much did the Transkei military government change the way liberation movements could use that Bantustan region as a safe haven and, of course, the promotion of fighting the apartheid government at that time?
We were a safe haven, especially for members of the United Democratic Front who were harassed in South Africa then, and we would house them. In terms of military training, the Transkei Defence Force not only trained the members of Umkhonto weSizwe and APLA in Transkei, but we were also requested by the leadership of the ANC to go and train Umkhonto weSizwe into conventional warfare in Uganda. So that operation was headed by Major General Mandela, who is now serving in the SANDF, and General Matanzima and General Mgwebi, who was once head of the United Nations Peacekeeping Force in Congo. So the caliber of officers we have produced in the Transkei Defence Force was top of the notch, and I'm happy with the role they have played since 1994.
Mr. Olomisa, a lot of people don't probably understand the value of how our neighboring countries helped in the training, in the sheltering of some of the exiled political leaders. Your interaction with these leaders and what the stories that they told you and the stories we were taught, obviously, or the very little we were taught in school, because we weren't really taught much in school about how the exiled leaders played such a huge role in getting assistance from the African countries. How much of it was given to our leaders during that time?
What I know is that countries like Swaziland, Lesotho, Zambia were destabilized by Pretoria regime for having housed the people who were in exile at the time. We are also aware that in Angola, the members of Umkhonto weSizwe were fighting along the MPLA, and they endured a lot of pressure from Pretoria. But thanks God, the summit which was held in Geneva between Reagan and Gorbachev in 1985 sort of eased things in the Southern Africa, because when they took a decision to say away with the so-called Cold War, then that pressure that forced the South African government out of Angola, and then in Angola they were told to say SADF, don't even stay in Namibia, go straight to Pretoria. And then MK go straight to Uganda. And the independence of Namibia was realized in 1990. And who was the next? It was us in 1994. So those pressures which were put by those who were in exile to lobby for our freedom, we should always salute them.
And the Cold War, Ms. Olomisa, you were there at the peak of the Cold War. Just talk to the viewers and those who don't have an idea of what the Cold War actually meant and the role that it played in South Africa at that time, because surely it had an effect throughout the whole globe, not just the then USSR and the United States.
Well, the Cold War was mainly a war between the West and East in a way. For instance, in the context of South Africa, Russia was seen to be supporting the Southern African countries, as well as, to some extent, China. Whilst, on the other hand, you will find that the Savimbis of this world, who was the opponent of Dos Santos in Angola, was supported by USA. But at the end of the day, we should be thankful to Gorbachev and Reagan, and also their respective secretaries of state, James Baker and Shevardnadze of Foreign Affairs of Russia. They read the mood and they implemented the peace in southern sub-Sahara. So that's why today we can say we are free, and although we are still going to was still struggling, but at least if we don't use the capacity we have and the opportunities, we can no longer blame Cold War, but when the struggle stalwarts of yesteryear are involved in looting the resources of the country, we can no longer blame those people.
Which we'll definitely get to in the later part of our conversation. And of course, Mr. Holomusa, the role of Cuba. I mean, that was massive, wasn't it? How much of a role did the late Fidel Castro play in helping the liberation movement of the time?
Yes, Cuba was classified as part of the Eastern Bloc in terms of the Cold War principles. But I think Cuba played a major role, especially in Angola, because they were withdrawn as a result of saying away with Cold War. They were the ones who were told, go home, SADF, go to Pretoria, don't even stop in Windhoek, go straight. MK, get out of Angola, go to Uganda. But Cuba, as you know, they fought. Those were hard. They fought hard. When I talked earlier on about liberated zones, they had control of certain zones when they were helping MPLA. Unlike our struggle here, not a single member of MK or APLA can stand up and say, we had a liberated zone in South Africa. So that's why you will find that our settlement, our freedom, our settlement in 1994 was a little bit lukewarm because militarily speaking, there were no winners between black and white confrontation in South Africa. So, but that weapon which the ANC used or chose to say, let's go and sit around the table, they exposed the Nationalist Party to be vulnerable, because they had invested more on weapons and their personnel and their soldiers.
I'm in conversation with the leader of the UDM, Mr. Bantu Holomisa. Stay tuned. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back to Truth to Power here on ITV Networks. I am in conversation, an exclusive to our conversation with Mr. Bantu Holomisa. Of course, this is part one of the discussion. You will have part two next week. Mr. Holomisa, let's talk about the resignation of George Matamzima and Stella Sigao. Why was it necessary at that time to force them out of the Transkei government? What were they doing that needed them out of the Transkei government and for new leadership to come into that area?
During that period of 1986, 1987, there were commissions of inquiries which were investigating the involvement of politicians in the corruption in the area. And the evidence emerged that Chief George Matanzima was embroiled in a scandal of Austrian tractors. And we went to his house as senior officers of the Defense Force, and we advised him to step down and let his party to elect a new leader. Chief George Matanzima complied, and then Stella Sigao was elected. And then, unfortunately, 86 days later, we obtained documentation which implicated her on a corrupt transaction by Saul Kesner, who paid 2 million rands to Matanzimas, and that 2 million rands was divided amongst the cabinet ministers in exchange for exclusive gambling rights. So we took a decision to say, no, it would appear that these apples, all of them are rotten. So let's take them out. So that's how the military government was established. And we immediately sent a signal to Pretoria to say it looks like Transkei is only recognized by Pretoria. So we would like to continue the process, but we want a clean governance, proper principles to be promoted. Hence, Chief George Matanzima was sent to court, to jail, after he was found guilty by independent courts. Stella Star, we applied for the extradition of Sol Kesner to be extradited to Transkei then, but Pretoria government flatly refused. Instead, they were involved in attempting to remove us from power. Of course, they failed.
Do you still feel that what had happened? Do the families of George Matanzima and Stella Strau still hold any grudges, or is that something that they have forgotten at the time?
They hold no grudges against us because remember that my second in command was General Titi Matanzima, and the eldest son to Chief George Matanzima, the then Prime Minister, was a major by rank in the Transkei Defence Force. There were also relatives of Sitaus in the defence. So in the Defence Force, we handle things differently from you guys, civilians. So if there's evidence on our side and we took a decision, irrespective of the family ties, we stick to the decision of the officer commanding.
Mr. Holomisa, we enter the new dawn. It's 1994, cabinets are being elected, the new cabinets are being elected. You are part of the ANC, NEC, and of course you...
I was part.
Yeah.
I'm no longer part.
Yes, you were part of the, of the ANC, NEC. Well, when I went part, I meant as a past tense. You're in the Department of Environmental Affairs and Tourism, as it was known at that time. I remember, Mr. Holomisa, you know, for us this was really something exciting because, you know, we're seeing politics as youngsters, and every time we put on the TV, you were seen as the famous man within cabinet, everywhere. Holomisa, Holomisa, Holomisa. It was being shouted everywhere. And this put some members in a state of insecurity. Was that something that you saw at that time, that your, how do I say, moment of being famous at that moment would have maybe overshadowed some of the other ministers who had that sense of insecurity?
I didn't see it that way. In actual fact, my popularity was when I was in Transkei, because I helped the ANC in a big way. Hence, I was voted #1 in the ANC conference in Bloemfontein in 1994. And but unfortunately, at that stage, I was still looking forward to learn more about the ANC. And so it was not even in my vocabulary that I would contest for a position. But when I went to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to testify about the incidents which took place in the then Transkei, then some leaders of the ANC took an exception that I had made a reference to the reasons why we get into power, making reference to Sol Kesner and the involvement of Transkei cabinet ministers then. So then I was taken aback. Oh, is that how politics works? Because I'm fresh from the military, we do things straight. But when Madiba said to me, I must apologize for what I've said there so that he can convince my political opponents within the ANC not to discipline me. I said, no, on a matter of principle, I'm not going to withdraw, even if it means you can remove me from your cabinet. There will be no stress for me. That will not be the end of Holomisa. So then late Kada Asmal and others who was head of DC was already shouting on TV to say Holomisa must go. And I said, what's going on here? And when they wanted me to go to the DC, I told them straight away that I cannot attend a kangaroo court. So if that's the way you deal in politics, so be it. I'm out of here. So as a matter of principle, I couldn't change the decisions why we had to remove the Matanzimas and Strauss. For them to say we were accusing Stella Strauss of corruption, but in the minds of everybody, including themselves, they knew why we intervened because it was public. Why ANC wanted to treat as if it's a revelation. So then I said, bye-bye, guys. But of course, after that, Matiba, Mbeki, Zuma, everybody, please come back home, Holomisa says. There is a saying which says, once bitten, twice shy. So the trust issues, guys. Stay where you are, I'll stay. And I smile now these days because I've been betting on a wicket of anti-corruption since 1987. And when I see them being cross-questioned at Zondo Commission, I said, yeah, thanks, I left early.
And that's the thing, Mr. Holomisa, because I remember during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings, of course, there was so much to go through, which was chaired by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I remember when you went to the TRC, you spoke with honesty because at that time you truly believed that the Transvaal government needed to be cleaned out of that corruption. Why did it hurt the ANC so much that your truth was made so loud within the TRC at that time?
I think they panicked beyond comprehension when I mentioned the name of Sol Kesner, because it turned out...
Did he capture was he capturing the ANC at that time?
Because I'm saying the ANC panicked, or let's say the ANC leadership panicked beyond comprehension, because it turned out that Sol Kesner was already bankrolling the party itself, the ANC, and some leaders within the ANC. So it emerged after that, when people say, the reason why they are doing this to you is because Sol Kesner has been bankrolling them, birthday parties, gave them 2 million for elections. And I was surprised because the ANC should have known that to associate themselves with Sol Kesner was not a good idea. But that's history. But they were sending a signal, looking in hindsight now, we can say. Also, this is how they have been surviving. If you look at what's happening now, state capture and other corrupt-related cases.
I'm in conversation with Bantu Holomisa. He is the UDM leader. We are just getting started with our conversation. Stay tuned. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back to Truth to Power. This is part one of the exclusive interview I am having with Mr. Bantu Holomisa. He is the UDM leader. Mr. Holomisa, let's talk about CODESA. You were there. Did the ANC miss a trick during these negotiations, or on face value, what we as the public are meant to believe, did everything go according to plan? Were there things that were missed during the CODESA negotiations?
Firstly, we need to understand the circumstances which led to the establishment of CODESA. The white South African regime and ANC, in between them, there were no winners, militarily speaking. So they opted to go and sit around the table. Obviously, when you negotiate, there are bargains. So the priority, unfortunately, de Klerk messed up the whole setup when he unleashed the so-called black-on-black violence. After he called everybody to come back home. Remember that even their military wing, the ANC's military wing, came back without carrying not a single pistol in their briefcases. So everybody was trapped inside. It became worse when they killed Chrisan. And then people were beginning to panic. This is when late Joe Slovo, Secretary General of the SACP, proposed to the ANC the so-called sunset clauses. Sunset clauses, by its nature, they've got a limited period. But that proposal meant, therefore, that the ANC and its alliances partners were demanding a date for elections, capitalizing on this Chris Hani's assassination. The focus shifted on the date for the elections. On the other hand, de Klerk was panicking as to the civil war. If civil war comes out, what will happen? So the gambling they had boomerang to them. So we sat down, and then Mandela and the ANC said, no, we are not going to agree here about the constitution, but let us have an elected body to draw the constitution. So there was an interim constitution, TEC, Transitional Executive Committee, and then 1996, the constitution was implemented, rather was approved. But economic, which include land and other issues, not much was said about that because it was part of those sunset clauses that, oh, let's give them a guarantee that the properties, we won't take them their properties. But the Constitution itself says the government must make sure that everybody is living a good quality life and also have got access to resources. So the people who have actually failed the majority citizens or South Africans is none other than the ANC because they had power. At one stage, they had a 2/3 majority. They could have changed all these things. So in other words, you can't blame the CODESA for that. CODESA addressed a specific period to say, take us out of this, through this river, using, let's say, let's use this boat, take us across, but when we are on that side, we will have power. And then we change the whole thing. And they didn't do it. Instead, they focus on looting the resources.
Yes. Mr. Lamisa, you and the ANC part ways, if I'm putting it quite lightly. The formation of the UDM, of course, begins, and the building blocks start in September 1997 when it was officially formed. At that time, why did you feel it was necessary for this new political party to be formed, and what gave you the desire at that time to say there has to be another alternative to the ANC?
You will recall that at that point in time, the corruption has already
begun.
Sarafina II, in 1994, there was a talk of arms deal, 97, 98, to procure more weapons. Yet, we thought that the focus will be on social security as opposed to buying guns. But it turned out that it was intended for certain people and a project. So, but on the other hand, we saw it then that one-party dominance breeds corruption. And we are going to follow in the same path as we have seen this north of our borders. So at that stage, we felt that there is a need to build a party which would include all population groupings, because at that stage it was more black versus white opposition parties. And I think we laid a good foundation. The environment, of course, was not conducive for us to be strong. I mean, you still had giants like Mandela, But I think one should be proud that I'm still there and other members of the UDM are still there. We're still occupying the crease. We didn't just emerge and then after that we disappeared.
Mr. Olomisa, the experience of Ralph Meyer, a lot of people saw it as the glass half empty or the glass half full. From the glass half empty scenario, it was seen as somebody who was from the National Party, somebody who sympathized with the National Party. The glass half full scenario was that he brings political experience to a new party. At that time, with the criticism against Mr. Ralph Meyer, how did you take it as somebody who's forming a new party, having an experienced head like himself?
I didn't take that experience, that move. Let me put it this way. I didn't take those who were arguing that seriously, because the members of National Party were already moving to the ANC.
For example, Martinus van Schalkwyk was one of them.
Being a liberation movement, who am I?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, yes. Yes, because I found it kind of, hypocritical that they would take some people from the National Party, and when you were doing it, or the UDM was doing it, then they would see it as, well, why is Bantu Olomisa taking somebody who sympathized with the National Party?
The British precedence was already done by them.
So how much did the experience of him, somebody who's been in politics for quite a long time, just help the UDM in terms of that building foundations?
Rolf Meyer tried his level best, but unfortunately his stay in the UDM didn't last because of the exodus of Nationalist Party members going to the ANC. And also he said no, he doesn't want to get involved in politics. I think the confusion was there on their side to say, must we partner with the UDM or must we go and be involved in a track to work with the ANC we have hammered the constitution with? Remember?
Yes.
They were in part of government of national unity as ministers. Now that Madiba has opened up for them to join the ANC, so there was this exodus. So the timing was not good, but at least he is a highly respected individual. He is still loved by the members of the UDM. We respect him for his contribution. But I guess now he's contributing peacefully, peace initiatives, international, being assigned by the government.
Mr. Olomisa, after the break, we are going to talk about the elections and, of course, how the UDM performed during the time. But one question I needed to ask you, it's the honeymoon period that South Africa had enjoyed from 1994 until 1999. Of course, sport played a huge role. Bafana won the Africa Cup of Nations. The Springboks won the 1995 World Cup. It kind of papered the cracks of the realities that we are facing right now as a democratic nation. Nelson Mandela was, or the late President Nelson Mandela was seen as that man that was the leader of that honeymoon period. How much did he try, given his age, to try and bring that sense of unity within each and every South Africa from all race and background?
Well, it's well documented that in his term of office, he did very well to deliver services. People for the first time got electricity, water, many communities. But in the issue of service delivery, the subsequent governments have failed dismally. Beki, Zuma, and so on, because the shift, there was a paradigm shift in terms of appointments of people. It was more about cadre deployment and not on merit. Madiba was lucky because in his first 5 years, he had experienced people from the old governments, homelands, National Party, ANC, and then, but when the comrades after him took over and wanted to Africanize both for the sake of Africanizing them, there were mistakes because some incompetent people ended up heading those institutions. And I don't think we have recovered. Whether you go to the SOEs, where comrades have ran those SOEs to the ground. State departments are a bunch of useless people who are heading them. Hence, they have been used unintentionally as gatekeepers for the billions of rands to be siphoned by the likes of Guptas, Bosasas, and so on.
Mr. Holomisa, before we go to the break, I keep seeing this video every single time for the last few weeks, the 1997 ANC elective conference. I know we don't have a crystal ball, we're not fortune tellers of that sort, but what would the country be in if the late Mama Winnie Mandela had put her name for the deputy president of the ANC during that conference? Would we be talking a different story? Because we all know what happens. Former President Jacob Zuma gets obviously elected as the deputy president, and Thabo Mbeki gets elected as the president. Would we be talking a different story if she was part of that top 6 during that 1997 elective conference?
I wouldn't vouch for any negative or positive outcome of that, except to say that Madiba was always concerned that the top leadership of the ANC is dominated by the closer speaking people.
All right.
So in that way, I think he would have personally intervened to say, notwithstanding your popularity, my wife, but please, for the sake of other nationalities, let us be seen to be representative.
I am in conversation with Mr. Bantu Holomisa, the leader of the UDM. Coming up after the break, as we wrap up part 1 of this discussion, we are going to be discussing how the UDM had performed during the national and provincial elections from 1999 up until now. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Truth to Power. I am in conversation with Mr. Bantu Holomisa, the leader of the UEM. This is an exclusive 2-part series right here on ITV Networks. Mr. Holomisa, now these are the stats that I got from the IEC. During the 1999 general election, this is when the UDM makes that massive impact. 14 seats won with a percentage of 3.42%, 9 seats in the Eastern Cape, and 1 seat in 5 different provinces. How important was the 1999 election for the UDM?
It was important to make a mark, and I think we did it in style. However, one has to understand that we were operating in a not so good environmental climate, and climate which is conducive for free politicking. At that stage, we lost a lot of our members who were killed or assassinated. But going forward, from there onwards, I think the issues of party funding handicapped us because there was a floor crossing which was introduced specifically to deal with us. And a lot of our leaders left and joined the National Party. And some were appointed as ambassadors, some were in Parliament. And the other issue which handicapped us is the question of funding. Big companies fund DA. ANC survived through tender system. That is, we give you a tender, out of that, 10% goes to Lutuli House. So they sustained themselves. And I wonder now what's going to happen after this Zondo Commission. Will they continue to loot the state resources in order to fund their party coffers. I sense that we are beginning to see that the playing field is going to be leveled.
Yes.
And I'm happy that we have sustained the UDM up until this day.
And
without
big companies,
support from big companies and also from the state tenders.
And Mr. Olomisa, of course, the subsequent elections after 1999, 2004 and 2009, new parties started coming into the frame, one of them being COPE. When one looks at COPE, of course, it was disgruntled members after the 2007 Polokwane ANC elective conference. Them coming in, how much of an impact did it make on the UDM at that time? Because the numbers did start going down. And what was needed from the UDM's perspective to sort of, I won't say re-emerge, but do something different to still maintain that voter base? Not in the Eastern Cape, because I know in the Eastern Cape, the dominance is still there because of the constituency that you hold within that province. But in the other provinces, what did the UDM need to do to sort of say we are still relevant within the political landscape?
It's resources. If we had resources, we would have defended those positions. But remember that the COPE was also backed up by some black businesses, white businesses who had hoped that they would be strong to say no to the ANC. Remember also that the black South Africans were always skeptical that an official opposition must be white-dominated. Yes. So in COPE, there were a lot of expectations, and people thought that here is a nucleus of a real opposition to the ANC, because they do the COPE people are from the ANC, and they do understand the passage of the struggle. Because some of them, people like Lekota from Robben Island, and many others. Yes, unfortunately, they allow themselves to be infiltrated by the ANC's intelligence, and they disseminated them.
Mr. Olomisa, the factions within the ANC started showing, of course, we saw COPE, as you mentioned. Parts of those members within the ANC had formed COPE. And we didn't see the EFF coming. Julius Malema, of course, expelled as the ANC Youth League a president, and then he takes so many of his members within the Youth League to form the EFF. Of course, Advocate Dali Mpofu, of course, joins them also. This new kid on the block, how did they change things? And how did it affect the UDM at that time? Because the EFF were quite successful in 2014.
No, there's no doubt about that. The EFF did very well. And also the mistake which the ANC made was to expel the entire executive of the Youth League, and they immediately took their constituencies along. Yes. And they worked hard, and also their move was attractive because the youth in this country are in majority. Yes. And they were being seen by the youth people as people who are representing them as their voice. So we have to commend them. They did very well. But as we go along, we will see as to whether they are managing to sustain that. Because in politics, they behave like sometimes the economic indicators of stock exchange. So you are down, you are up, you are down. But so far, they did well, and also they came out of the ANC to tell the people that the ANC of today is not the same as that ANC we used to know. We are from there, believe us.
And Mr. Olomisa, that's my last question for part one of the series. So many of the great liberation fighters of our country has passed on. Walter Sisulu, Grasani, Steve Biko, Oliver Tambo, the names go on. If they look now at what South Africa has become, what would go through their heads? You knew them so well. You were there with them. What would they be saying, looking at the current state of our country?
They would simply say the ANC of today has abandoned the original agenda. It's about the politics of the stomach today, which we are talking about. The liberators of yesteryear have turned out to be hyenas and wolves, unfortunately. So therefore, they must be turning in their graves. I doubt very much if they would be impressed by any of the current ANC leaders.
And
because, I mean, we wasted how many months and years talking about unity. And this unity, so-called unity, is not based on the differences. Let me put it this way, this call for unity is not based on ideological differences, but it's about who has access to the resources. A thing which they fought for, to say the resources of this country must be to the benefit of all people. But today, it's free for all for the comrades who are in control of these factions.
as Frans Fanon would say, the political bourgeoisie are currently at this moment benefiting, will benefit from it once they have complete power. Mr. Holomisa, this is part one of our conversation. Of course, part two will be next week. So do stay tuned to ITV Network, same time, same place next week. Part two of my discussion with the UDM leader, the former Major General of the Transkei Defence Force and a current Member of Parliament, Bantu Holomisa. Do enjoy the rest of your week and your weekend, and I will see you again next week, same time, same place. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.